It was a raw Monday morning in Shadow Creek Estates, early November, the air already thick with that damp, metallic chill that tells you the rainy season isn't messing around. I'd lived in that neighborhood for 6 quiet years, expected nothing more dramatic than a passive-aggressive note about my mailbox color. But that morning, as I walked down to grab the mail, the ground itself looked wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. There was this hairline fracture, thin as a spider silk, snaking its way through the concrete sidewalk right near the edge of the lot they called the Vista Lot. The one the HOA was so damn proud of. That lot was the site of their legacy pavilion, a grand 2-story monument of beige ambition with a wraparound deck and, get this, an underground storm shelter. The crack went down the curb, disappearing right where they'd bulldozed the last of the wild scrub brush. And when I crouched down and pressed my hand against the cold, jagged concrete, I knew it wasn't a cosmetic break. It was the kind of split that happens when the earth underneath shifts, when the skeleton breaks. Now, most people would have just stepped over it. Just another repair job for the community funds. But I'm not most people, or at least I wasn't back when my knees cracked less and my hands still knew the feel of a shovel. See, before I retired early, I worked for the Federal Geological Response Unit, a job where you walked mud flows and landslides from the Rockies to the coast, where slope integrity and subsoil saturation wasn't just science, it was the language you spoke. And I knew what slow disaster looked like. I had carried the wreckage of it. I walked the perimeter of the Vista Lot, my boots crunching over the loose, freshly laid gravel. The dirt was too disturbed, too churned up, and they'd taken out every single root system that had been holding that shallow ridge together for a century. You don't shave a corner off a ridge like that without consequences. Because water always remembers where it's been, and if you give it enough time and pressure, it'll carve its memory straight through your foundation. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My old trauma was stirring. I hauled the old file boxes down from the attic, the ones with my FEMA maps, the hydrogeological surveys, the old case studies, and I started building a report. It felt strange, like putting on a uniform that didn't fit anymore, but the language came back to me. I ran simulations, cross-referenced historical runoff data for the last decade, and by sunrise, I had 17 pages of cold, hard, annotated, and indisputable proof. The warning was clear: high risk of accelerated soil failure in Zone 3B. That was their lot. Mine, thankfully, was built on bedrock, which is why I'd chosen it in the first place. I printed 5 copies, bound them tight. I walked into the Shadow Creek HOA office that morning. Veronica Sterling, the HOA president, a woman whose pearls were always just a little too tight, whose smile was always a little too wide, was locked in a budget meeting. Her assistant, Miles, a kid with perfect teeth and the moral spine of a jellyfish, sighed when I told him it wasn't about budgets, it was about ground failure. He took the folder, promised to pass it along, and I watched him place it on a stack beneath 3 catering menus. I honestly don't think he even saw the red ink on the cover. That afternoon, the bulldozers arrived. Big, yellow, diesel-fueled beasts with the HOA logo painted on the side. They rumbled onto the lot like arrogant kings claiming a new kingdom, their metal teeth scraping deeper and deeper into the slope I had just warned them about. And the worst part, neighbors gathered to cheer them on like it was a damn parade, bringing lawn chairs and iced tea. I stood at my window, the report heavy in my hand, watching them clap for the very machines that were digging their own collective grave. A few days later, I got my response. It wasn't about the report, of course. It was a fine $75 for unauthorized interference with HOA operations, accusing me of trespassing. They didn't care about the risk to life and property. They cared about control. The money didn't bother me. I could pay that 10 times over. It was the condescension. The absolute dismissal of not just the data, but of me, a man who had once briefed governors during Level 1 crises. I went back to the lot 3 days later, and I found the fatal mistake. The new excavation had cut directly into a secondary water path, a dry trench now. Sure, but anyone who understood the hydrology of that region knew it would become a funnel in the coming rains. No retention walls, no soil stabilization, nothing but ignorance and arrogance. building a monument that was set to become a tomb. I walked into the next HOA meeting at the beige-carpeted rec center. The place always smelled like stale coffee and desperation, not expecting applause, but certainly not expecting the public humiliation that followed. I was wearing my old windbreaker, carrying a new folder stuffed with annotated overlays, all real, scientific, indisputable evidence. I was third on the public comment list, right after a lady complaining about wind chimes. I walked to the mic, cleared my throat. My name is Arthur Finch. I live on Shadow Creek Lane, and I'm here to address the construction on the Vista lot. Veronica raised an eyebrow, her voice syrupy, sweet. Mr. Finch, are you a licensed structural engineer with the state of North Carolina? Formerly federal, I countered, keeping my voice steady. Department of Geological Emergency Response. I've led failure evaluations from New Mexico to Tennessee. Oh, I see, she purred. And have you submitted your concerns through the proper HOA feedback form, or are we just freelancing tonight? A ripple of laughter went through the room. She had them in the palm of her manicured hand. I held up the sealed envelope. I already submitted it with supporting documentation. I haven't received a response. Veronica gave a condescending smile. Well, I apologize if there was a delay. Miles is new, but I'm sure the developers the board contracted, actual licensed professionals, Arthur, have already done their due diligence. I knew the name of her firm. They specialized in golf courses and luxury pools, not land stability. With respect, I pushed back, their reports did not include any subsurface hydrology modeling. They didn't account for the latent runoff from the ridge. I've done the modeling. It's here. If you keep excavating that slope, it will give. I'm not guessing. I'm warning you. Veronica let out a tight, amused laugh, the sound that cut me deepest. Mr. Finch, I understand that you have strong feelings about this. But if we halted every project based on someone's personal opinion, it's not an opinion. I cut in, sharper than I intended. It's physics. That's when the audience shifted. I was no longer the quirky neighbor. I was the aggressive man with the charts. Veronica leaned back, her smile fading slightly. We appreciate your passion, Arthur, but unless you're prepared to file a formal injunction with the city, I suggest you let the licensed experts handle it. Then she turned her back to me, addressing the audience. Any other comments tonight? No? Great. Let's move on. I stood there, dismissed, holding my map like a fool left talking after the music stopped. As I left, I overheard Veronica laughing with a board member. Did you see the way he clutched those papers? Poor guy's been reading too many disaster novels. Probably lonely. That house of his has been quiet ever since. She didn't have to finish the sentence. They knew. They knew I had lost my wife, Sarah, and my daughter, Chloe, 14 years ago, to a mountainside collapse during a freak storm. Poorly built retaining wall, heavy rain. They were eating breakfast when the earth took them. That pain had rewired me. It had made me relentless when I smelled risk, and I smelled it now, rotting in the soil beneath the Vista lot. I tried to let it go. I really did. But 2 days later, when the bulldozers returned, digging with even more force, louder, faster, as if to prove something, I knew they weren't just ignoring me. They were daring the ground to collapse. I finally pulled out the one report. I hadn't shown Veronica. A confidential hydrological map that showed a history of secondary water veins beneath this very region. Invisible arteries that only filled during years of heavy saturation, years like this one. The lot they were building on sat directly above one of them. That night, I sent the full report not to the HOA, but to the city planning department, the county review board, even my old contact at FEMA. I attached every document, but more than that, I told them a story. I told them about Sarah and Chloe, the mud, the silence that followed. Because numbers don't always shake people awake. Stories do. Then, I printed 5 bound copies of the whole damn thing and walked them to every doorstep on Shadow Creek Estates. Sliding them under doormats, taped them to mailboxes. On the front, in bold, was my name, my credentials, and one single sentence. You deserve to know what the HOA is risking on your behalf. By noon, the neighborhood group chat exploded. Is this guy serious? He's mentally unstable. I heard his family died in a landslide. But mixed in with the paranoia were other messages. Wait, I saw those cracks he's talking about. My kids play on that slope. Why didn't Veronica mention this risk? I'm calling the city. The next day, a young reporter named Ben showed up. I saw your letter making the rounds online, he said. I nodded. I didn't want fame. I wanted protection. If my face, my name, and my facts were public, they couldn't just erase me. The article came out. Former federal geologist warns of catastrophic risk at Shadow Creek Clubhouse site. The HOA felt the tremor. They taped a cease and desist notice to my door. No signature, no letterhead, just raw fear masquerading as power. I scanned it, filed it, and called my nephew Jordan, who specializes in real estate litigation. You've got the documentation, Arthur? Yes, and their threats. Everything's recorded. Good, he said. Then let's play by their rules legally. Then the rain came. It didn't come gently. It came in long, wind-driven lashes, the kind that peel paint and turn yards into swamps. But still they kept digging. Veronica, desperate, rushed the project to finish the foundation, working under floodlights and false confidence. I stood at my driveway watching the thick, muddy slurry choke the storm drains. My weather station read, soil saturation 97%, slope shift 6 inches, groundwater movement, red zone. I sent one last warning, this time with time-stamped security footage showing a visible sinkhole developing just 15 feet from the foundation. But by then, the silence from the city had changed. It wasn't indifference. It was fear. The assistant city inspector, Ramirez, called me from a private line. I read your submission, he said, voice low. But I was told to stand down. Look, off the record, keep records of everything. And don't stand too close to that hill. He hung up. It felt like being back in the field right before the break. You don't always hear the earth move. Sometimes you just feel it in your bones, in your ribs. The next morning, the sky cracked open again. Thunder boomed, shaking every window. At 7:04 a.m., a loud snap echoed down the street. I ran out barefoot. A retaining wall at the construction site had buckled, spilling concrete and mud. Veronica arrived in her SUV, still in heels, and started scolding the crew about improper water channeling. Water channeling. The slope had shifted 3 inches in a day, and she was worried about channels. I took photos from the sidewalk. Clear close-ups of the fractured base, the mud-tracked floor inside the skeleton. By noon, the neighborhood chat exploded again. Why is our HOA building collapsing before it's even finished? And then the one that hit home, Arthur Finch warned us. We didn't listen. That evening, a young father, Derek, whose backyard bordered the project, came to my door, soaked, holding the file I'd given him weeks ago. I'm sorry, he said. I thought you were just some bitter old guy. But you were right. Now what? He asked. I looked past him toward the lot. Now, I said, we wait for the land to speak louder. It happened sometime between midnight and 3 a.m. The night was eerily still. The rain subsided, but the saturation had peaked at 100%. I woke up around 3:10 a.m. to the sound of a deep, gut-punching thud. Not an explosion, but something heavier, something final. My Labrador, Gus, was already barking, scrambling toward the front door. I threw on my boots and stepped into the chill. The air was thick with the raw, metallic tang of wet earth. When I rounded the corner, I stopped dead. The southern end of the lot had sunk, a wide depression where the land had dropped nearly 2 feet. The concrete foundation had fractured in 3 places, jagged tears splitting the slab like lightning scars. But the most terrifying sight was the fissure, a black, empty space running from the slab straight into the wooded slope, a literal wound in the earth, maybe 6 inches wide. I lowered my flashlight. The beam disappeared into darkness. That wasn't a crack. It was a void. The subsurface had failed. Within an hour, Veronica arrived. She stepped out of her navy windbreaker and rubber boots and walked to the edge of the sinkhole with deliberate, composed steps, as if her posture could change reality. She saw me standing at the edge of my yard. Our eyes met, and for the first time, she didn't smirk. She didn't say a word, but her face, it was white, drawn, and it said everything. She knew. A day later, the news hit. Footage of the collapse was everywhere. But the reckoning wasn't complete until Veronica made her final desperate move. She was still trying to show strength. On a gray, misty morning, Despite the site being yellow-taped and obviously failing, she gathered a small crowd, maybe 24 residents, and prepared for a staged ribbon cutting. I watched from across the street. She stood on a small borrowed stage, mic in hand. "Today marks a new chapter in Shadow Creek's story," she began, her voice amplified and too cheerful for the lead-colored sky. "A symbol of what we can build when we come together." Her words dissolved into background noise. All I could focus on was the ground beneath her, a subtle shift. A tremble I felt in my shoes. I whispered, "No!" And then it happened. It began with a sharp snap, like a dry branch breaking underfoot. Then another. Then the sound deepened, a low groan from the earth, as if the slope itself was exhaling after holding tension too long. Veronica turned, her eyes wide with pure animal terror. The southern corner of the foundation collapsed instantly, an entire section of slab vanishing into the yawning earth. A sickening, deafening crack echoed as the rebar snapped like cheap spaghetti. People screamed. They ran. Trent stumbled, dragging an elderly woman off the stage just as the platform lurched and tilted sideways. I was already sprinting toward the crowd, yelling, "Away from the edge! Back up now!" A second collapse came seconds later, worse. The north wall caved inward, the roof supports buckled, and a section of the framing crumpled and folded like cardboard. I saw Veronica crawl away from the edge, just as the ground beneath where she'd stood dropped a full 2 feet, first slow, then fast, like a trap door opening. The third and final collapse took the rest. The center of the lot gave way entirely. A wide sinkhole opened like the earth had swallowed a bite of concrete and wasn't done chewing. We stood there, soaked, muddy, and shaking, staring at the gaping wound in the hill, a chasm at least 20 feet deep and growing, carrying the twisted remains of their polished ambition down with it. Sirens were wailing in the distance. The reporter, Ben, jogged over, breathless. "Arthur, did you see it happen? Can I get a quote?" I looked past him at the wreckage, the rain still carving lines through what remained of the earth's patience. I looked straight at Ben. They built a legacy on a lie. The ground just told the truth. The fallout was swift, messy, and absolute. Veronica's resignation was announced that night. No apology, just gone. The HOA's insurance provider dropped their policy, citing willful negligence. The city council finally convened, and for the first time, I walked into that chamber carrying the same folder they had laughed at. But this time, every chair was filled, and I spoke as an expert witness. This was not an accident, I concluded. It was a decision. The Legacy Pavilion was never rebuilt. Eventually, the city contracted a geological restoration crew, the kind of professionals who actually read risk maps, and they filled the sinkhole, replanting native grass. The lot is now just a quiet green space. No banners, no flags, no monuments, just a small wooden sign that reads, "Restoration Area. Do not disturb." It's strange the way healing works. It doesn't arrive all at once. There's no parade, just small things. A breath that doesn't catch. A night where sleep comes easier. A few months later, I was out pruning the hedges when a little girl and her mother walked up the driveway. The girl, maybe 8, handed me a bundle wrapped in purple paper. I opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing, bright colors, a house, a man with a dog, and a large, smiling sun with a speech bubble that read, "Thank you for keeping us safe." The little girl looked up at me. "My daddy said you saved our neighborhood. I think you're a good listener." I knelt down, eye level with her. "Thank you, Sophie," I said. "That means more than you know." I framed that drawing. It hangs above my desk now, next to the old photos of Sarah and Chloe. Not because it replaces them, but because somehow it stitches something shut. I still think about that cabin in the mountains, the morning the land took everything. But now when I remember it, I don't feel just the loss. I feel the promise I made to myself and to Chloe, to the earth beneath our feet. Pay attention. Speak when no one else will. Stand your ground when the ground shakes. That promise saved a neighborhood, maybe more. I may never get to rebuild what I lost, but I did build something, a truth that couldn't be buried. And now when the wind moves through the grass on that once doomed lot, I don't hear warning anymore. I just hear quiet. If you've ever had to fight a system that was too arrogant to listen, Or if your local HOA tried to bury a truth they didn't want you to see, tell me your story in the comments below. Did justice prevail? Who was your Veronica Sterling? And what did the community ultimately learn about the cost of silence? Like, subscribe, and share this video, because sometimes the only way to beat the powerful is to make their truth public.